This is Dan Schneider. This is a new video series that I'm doing, interviews with people that I've known in my life. I am calling it Biorama, and in it I will talk with people that I have known in my life, people I have grown up with in my neighborhoods, in the jobs that I've worked, in school, people I've known, or women I've dated, all sorts of people, just to give a sense of what life was like to be a typical person in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. My first guest is Marc Taylor. He's the man you see before him. I have not been in his presence for probably about 40 years, but we have been in contact on the internet for about the last 15 years. And we're going to talk about growing up together and going to school together. And that conversation will begin in a moment. My first guest on Biorama is Marc Taylor. He is someone that probably, other than my sister, probably is the only person I know who is still alive who has known me the longest, because we met in kindergarten, so when we were 5, so 46 years. As I said, we haven't been in each other's presence for 40 or so years, but we've known each other for 46 years. So welcome, Marc. And let me just ask a little bit, toss out a few questions about your family, because we grew up together. Well, we didn't live in the same neighborhood because you're black, I'm white, and in New York back in those days, it was quite segregated, even though we weren't in the South. But we did go to school together for about 5 or 6 years, and we met in kindergarten. So let me ask a little bit of background about your family or whatnot. Was your family originally from the South, or were they New York for several generations?
All four of my grandparents are from North Carolina,
Uh-huh.
but my parents are from Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy specifically. That's where they met, got married, and everything. Actually, where I was born, at age 1, I moved from Brooklyn to Queens,
Yeah,
where I've really been living ever since.
yeah. And you're currently living in Jamaica?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I grew up in Ridgewood and Glendale, which is a bit west of Jamaica. For people who would look on a map, Jamaica is near Kennedy Airport, whereas where I grew up was on the border of Brooklyn and Queens. Um,
Right.
so let me ask a little bit about your social life before you, or your early years before you started school. I know I met your mother, and I remember the first thing that I remember about your mother was how pretty she was.
Oh,
And
thanks.
no, seriously, I remember thinking, wow, he's got a pretty mom. Because my mom was born in 1916, so she's probably 20 or more years older than your mom. And
Yeah, mine was born in 1941.
okay, so 25 years. So I remember thinking, wow, she's real young and pretty for a mother. um, and I remember one of my earliest memories of you and your mom. I guess we were maybe 6 or 7, and we both went to this religious school called St. John's Elementary. It was a Lutheran school, and so you had to wear a certain outfit to go to school. And I remember one of the summers, either 6 or 7, we had to go shopping down in Brooklyn, my mom and I, to get the uniform for that
Oh,
year.
right, uniforms, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember we met you and your mom in this, what I guess you would call like a bodega-like store. I remember it being with low cement ceilings and clothes all over in these big bins and whatnot. And do you remember anything like that? What are
I
your
remember,
Go ahead.
yeah, I do remember going shopping to get, well, actually, what we would call a uniform. That's really what it was.
Yeah,
And the place where we went, it just seemed small and dingy.
yeah,
Um, I guess we're describing the same situation. That's kind of my memory of it. It just seemed very small and kind of dingy.
yeah.
Uh, and, picking out uniforms that, we really had to wear every
Yeah.
day. The maroon jacket and the gray slacks and the clip-on tie. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Now, did you have any siblings?
no, it's just me.
Yeah.
I'm actually the third youngest of 18 grandchildren.
Uh-huh.
And so, in a sense, all of my cousins they were kind of like when my siblings growing up. We were very close at the time.
Hmm.
So, in a sense, they were my siblings.
Yeah, I know I saw on, I think it was your Facebook page, maybe 6 months, a year or so ago, that there's a photo of you and your father. I think it was like at a sliding pond or at some, jungle
Yeah,
gym or something.
That's Special Meadow Park.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your father. What did he do for a living?
He's a retired trans police officer, and it's funny when I'm going out on a tangent a little bit. The basketball player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar,
Yeah,
his father was also a trans police officer, and I don't know if you know about trans. They work three different shifts. It's like one week you're working 12 to 8,
yeah,
the next week 8 to 4, and the next week 4 to 12. And
yeah,
when Kareem described in his book that like one week you see your father regularly, the next week you see him, off and on, and the third week you don't see him at all.
yeah,
And after a while you get used to those shifts.
yeah,
And it like took me back and says, wow, yeah, that's right. I remember as a little boy just knowing that that's the way it was. Like one week I saw my father regularly, the next week I saw a bit here and there. The next week I saw very little of him, and I guess I was told don't be try to keep it quiet to not wake him while he's sleeping these crazy hours.
yeah. I
So
know.
yeah, that's what he did.
I've worked overnight too, and I read some of Kareem's books. Hopefully, one of these days I can interview him, but it's sometimes hard to get a big name like him. So, how about your mother? Was your mother working a job when you were young, or was she stay at home?
Yeah, my mother worked. She's like a lab technologist.
Oh,
I know she worked for a while in Red Hook and then downtown Brooklyn during my St. John's years. So
yeah,
during my infancy, my grandmother kept me. I mean, every day she would drive me into Brooklyn to stay with my grandmother. Uh, and I have a cousin who's just 6 months older than me, so she really took care of both of us. We were kind of like frick and frack, and um, yeah, that was it. And then once I got to, I guess, preschool age, I was spent time in Queens every day. Uh, there was like a program at Queens College, and it was funny because when we got back in touch, she said, "You remember that when we started kindergarten, that I already knew how to read."
yeah. I was just going
And
to ask you about that. Yeah,
and I relayed that story to my parents, and my father said, "Yeah, that's probably comes from that preschool program you went to at Queens College every day." And
yeah,
I didn't remember, but okay, well I just knew going to Flushing, and I said, okay, well I guess that's where it was.
yeah. So, let me just ask, do you remember like the neighborhood that you grew up in? Did you have any regular friends in the neighborhood as 4 or 5? Because when I think back to my early childhood, I can dimly remember being 4 or 5, but everything else is just people showing me photographs and, that kid you used to play with, and I don't remember that kid, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The block that I lived on was very small. In fact, it's funny. Now I go back there on occasions. Like I can't believe how small it is. But I lived in a three-family house, and the other two families each had a male child who was 6 years older than me. So I, you know, they were kind of who I played with. I mean, to the extent that they allowed somebody 6 years their junior to tag along with them.
Mhm.
And even like my earliest childhood memories are just like say the three of us just sitting on the stoop in the evening or something.
Yeah,
Um, so I just really played with whoever was in the block or whoever wanted to. I mean, we were close, and also people kind of in that block kind of looked at my parents as this so-called hotshot young couple, which I didn't realize until maybe 40 years later when we all got back in touch on Facebook. So some of that respect and admiration kind of trickled down to me. So it wasn't too often where I was pushed aside as little Mark.
yeah.
You can't play with us.
I Some of my early memories of the late '60s, I remember, and I think you were born in what, March of '65, so you're about a month younger than
Yeah.
me. I was born February of '65. Uh, uh, some of my earliest memories are of like hippie kids, the anti-war movement. I'm wondering because I guess if you were in Jamaica mostly, was there a lot of like Black Muslim or Black Panthers there? Was it politically active against the Vietnam War? Do you remember any things like that as a child?
Not at all.
No.
Perhaps it was there. Maybe I just didn't see it. Maybe I was just isolated from it.
Hmm.
That's really. I just don't really remember so much of the Black Power movement of the late '60s. Once
Yeah.
I guess King's message, he at the time was getting a little, what they felt a little antiquated.
Yeah.
So I really don't remember the Panthers or the Muslims or
Yeah.
I just don't remember that in my isolated world of being 4 or 5 years old before starting St. John's.
Now, when we got in contact about 14, 15 years ago online, and I forget how I don't know how the hell, I don't remember how we actually got in contact because that was pre-Facebook, but however we got.
I think you Googled me and you saw something about my book, and I think
that's right. You had a website, so I contacted you. That's right. And I want to ask that because I did a show back in '03 with you about your books about the history of soul music and whatnot. Uh, in your earliest memories, was the soul music, Motown playing in the background? What are some of your early memories of music?
Yeah. Again, being a big family, me being one of the third youngest of 18 grandchildren, and my father being the youngest of 9 children, I can remember just big get-togethers at my grandmother's house at Christmas time and Thanksgiving, and it seems like Motown was always playing in the background, or I guess music was always, I guess, kind of my way of communicating with people, so to speak, because no matter how young or old you are, if you can kind of hold your own in a conversation about music, even if you're talking to a cousin 6 or 7 years older than you, that was really the best way to communicate. So, I mean, I remember Ed Sullivan. I remember the Ed Sullivan show, or seeing the Supremes, or the Fifth Dimension with Ed Sullivan, or just gravitating to albums. We went to people's houses and they had an album laying around, just looking at it while the music was playing. I remember Sly and the Family Stone, and everybody Universal loved Sly and the Family Stone, and my father's and my mother's also. Their musical tastes were worldly. So I remember my father bringing home Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Petulia Clark, and really just seeing all of that on TV, as well as soul music, which was predominant in my neighborhood and just my general surroundings. So when I got to St. John's and being the only black kid in the class, being exposed to 70s soft rock music, I mean, I kind of gravitated to it right away.
What, like James Taylor, Carly Simon, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I can remember that, and okay, I forgot who was it, because I feel the earth move under my feet. I sung that song, but I remember that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was just us or other classmates being able to bring in records during show and tell or whatever. I don't know, but I was just always exposed to that music. And on days off, I watched, vacation. If I had to stay with a kid down the block or something like that, I was too young to stay home by myself. We watched the Partridge Family and things like that. So I was always open and exposed, to that wide world of music.
Yeah, I do remember. I think in kindergarten, and it was Mrs. Krause was our kindergarten teacher, right?
Krause,
and we had I think we went in the afternoon. There was a morning class and an afternoon class. And I think she did have play little 45 records of then current hits, and we would do things like dance. We'd take a nap, and she'd play music. So maybe that's how we got inculcated into that. You mentioned the Partridge Family. I was going to ask about did you have any favorite television shows growing up? Did you? I did a show, for example, in my Dan Schneider video interviews about Saturday morning cartoons. Do you remember any of the Saturday morning cartoons? Did you watch any of them regularly?
Wow. Okay. Jackson 5 cartoons.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I watched that.
But they were so much better than I think they had the Osmond brothers too. That a cartoon.
Yeah. And even you mentioned the Osmond brothers. I mean, when they hit with One Bad Apple, I like that song as well. But I think maybe I'm going a little further. I liked what was the Scatman Crothers was the voice. Oh boy. I can't think of the character's name, but I like the Underdog, Bugs Bunny, of course. I just like and even just general shows. I guess they were probably in syndication by the time these came along, but I used to watch I Dream of Jeannie and Maxwell Smart and again on days off, we just, if it was depending on the weather, we just had to sit around at home all day watching TV.
Yeah.
We remember the show The Magic Garden?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I interviewed that woman Carol Demas, the Magic Garden, one of the
really.
hosts. Yeah, it's one of she's I think my second or third actor interview, and it's a good interview. Let me just ask about sports. Was your father a big sports fan? Did you follow boxing or baseball or football?
No, I didn't. I didn't. It's funny. As much as a sports nut as I became, and I guess to a lesser extent still am and somewhat historian, I really didn't get into sports at all, at least watching it, until really third or fourth grade.
Yeah.
So let's say like 1974 to be specific. I mean, I kind of just had a passing knowledge that the Knicks won the championship when we were in second grade. That was the last time they won it.
Yeah.
And the only athletes who I was really aware of were those who did TV commercials. I think Hank Aaron did a commercial for O. Henry, the candy bar.
Yeah.
So I was aware of him. But other than that, Joe Namath did whatever commercials he did. So that was really pretty much it for me for sports until really I want to say late third grade, and once fourth grade hit, then I was hooked.
Yeah. Let me just back up and just ask because people watching this at some indefinite point in the future might just look back historically. You're you still, as you were as a child, are light-skinned. Do you know if you had any white ancestors that you know of? Have you done any genealogy searches or anything like that? Like maybe you had a grandpa in North Carolina who was a redneck who got together with your great grandmother or something.
No, I know that. Well, both my parents, all four of my grandparents are black. My mother has told me that my grandfather's mother was very, very light.
Uh-huh.
A little lighter than me or her. So I would imagine that perhaps
Yeah.
one of her parents were white. But that's about the. It would go that far back.
Yeah. Let's see. Like I said, do you have any specific memories? Like, we want to sort of go basically try to be a little chronological as we move forward. Do you have any particular memories of the kindergarten class? We talked about Mrs. Krause. Do you remember any of the other kids? Because other than you, the only person other than my sister that would have known me before you was a girl named Karen Blash, the tallest girl in the class, the tallest person
Yeah.
in the class at the time, who I actually knew in nursery school. That's what they called pre-K then, nursery school. I met her there, and then we were in kindergarten together in the same class with you. Do you have any memories of the two kids who may have fought or any kind of particular quirks about nothing that can impugn someone,
Yeah.
but anything big memories from kindergarten?
Kindergarten was it was fun for me, I guess, because one, we were only there half a day.
Yeah.
It was new and exciting to me. I didn't feel out of place being the only black kid in class. There was a sixth grader who lived in my block. He was kind of my guardian, big brother, made sure I got home because we had 2 long bus rides.
Yeah.
So he was always my somewhat security blanket.
Yeah.
There. So I never felt out of place or anything. As far as I didn't know anybody before I got to kindergarten. But of course, I remember you, and I guess through kindergarten through fourth grade, which time I left, those who I felt the closest to were those who were in our afternoon class, as opposed to the morning class where we all got together in first grade. But even throughout, I remember Karen Blash. I think in first grade, either I gave her or she gave me the chicken pox. We always laughed about that.
Are you in touch with? Are you in touch with her?
No, not at all. Really, very few who I got in touch with through Facebook, and even then, it's if you see something, you might hit the like button, or you send a birthday message or something like that, and that's really about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I know it's odd because I took a long bus ride home in the opposite direction. St. John's was sort of midpoint between both of
Yeah.
our homes in opposite directions. You headed east to Jamaica, I headed west to Ridgewood. Um, and the interesting thing was, like you said, I mean, even though you may have had an older guardian, I remember being in kindergarten and riding the school bus home. Or not the school bus,
Okay.
the actual MTA buses. And
Yeah.
today, like for example, kids here, I live in Texas. I mean, the parents will go out of their way to drive their kids. And I mean, I can understand it to a certain degree, but it's like they baby the children so much today.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. Getting back to kindergarten. Actually, that year, if you remember a kid named Glenn, who was curly head,
Right, yeah,
he just stayed that 1 year.
yeah,
And actually, he was really my best friend in kindergarten. I
yeah.
mean, when we had birthday parties, he came to my home. I think he was the only white kid there, and vice versa when he had his. Um,
Do you remember his last name?
no,
Uh,
no, I couldn't
I
figure
know
out
who
who
you're
it was.
talking about, and I know if I looked on if I had our class picture, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. And I know there was one instance where after class, my mother and I went to their home, and we were having a nice time. But I think his father or uncle or whoever, the male figure came home, and he blew his top seeing us there.
Yeah,
And he just blew his top and started cursing out. I mean, and he wasn't talking English, but my mother and I knew enough that hey, it's okay, it's time to leave.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, after kindergarten, remember we had like a little graduation day in kindergarten,
yeah.
and afterwards, I guess I just assumed that okay, you go your way over to some, I go mine, and I'll see you in first grade. But he never came back.
Yeah.
That day was the last I saw him.
It's interesting you mentioned that. Other than meeting your mom and you shopping for the clothes, I do remember one time, and I'm 95% sure that I did visit your home or your apartment one time.
I remember that. I think yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the odd thing is, I remember even asking my mom, can Mark come over and visit and whatnot? But I lived in such an ethnic neighborhood with Italians and Germans mostly that it would not have been safe for you to come over there.
Okay,
And it's the odd thing is just 3 or 4 blocks away on the opposite side of the Brooklyn Queens border, there were a lot of blacks and Puerto Ricans. But in those days, that border that separated Brooklyn and Queens was sort of like the Berlin Wall. People just
yeah,
didn't cross. So you had ethnic whites on one side and blacks and Puerto Ricans on the other side. And I know the
right.
blacks and Puerto Ricans didn't get along that well either. And it was just a bizarre thing because at that age, 5 or 6, I was like, I don't understand why Mark couldn't come. I remember my mom saying, no, it wouldn't be safe for him to come or whatnot. But yet it was safe. And I maybe it was your birthday or something. It might have been like a birthday party that you had that you invited me
Uh,
to. I don't recall the exact reason, but I do remember going at least once to your home or
so
your
I
apartment.
remember. I don't remember the circumstances, but I know you did come by.
Yeah. Um, uh, so let me just ask you in broad terms, and you don't have to mention any names or anything. Since you were the only black kid, were you ever? Do you remember any incidents of like overt bigotry or racism towards you? I mean, I talked about when we first got together how I remembered in second grade, and you don't have to go into details. Your parents were, I think, getting divorced at the time, and you had some issues with that. And for some reason, because you were a lot bigger and stronger than me at the time, we got into a fight, and you were pummeling me. And I remember a couple of the other boys in class, white boys, had told me, "Call him a nigger." And I remember I said it that time, and I always felt guilty about saying because I remember the look on your face, and I wrote a poem about it years later. And then when we got in contact, I told you about it. And what amazed me was you had absolutely no memory of this. And it was something that to me, I felt such guilt over because my dad loved Martin Luther King. My dad was a working class Democrat, flaming liberal, and if he had heard me call you that, he would have slapped me across the room. And I felt such guilt because I remember the hurt in your eyes. But it amazed me that you had no memory of that.
I still don't, and maybe it was because you and I had such a strong foundation going back to kindergarten.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
we kind of clicked right away that it didn't, and I'm surprised because something like that I would remember.
Yeah,
So maybe I mean maybe I didn't understand the significance of
yeah.
it in second grade. But you know, but or maybe I was upset at the time, but by next day, whatever, it
Yeah.
kind of just, I was done with it. We were friends, and I just went over my head.
Yeah.
I just don't remember. But so far as answering your question, as far as racism, I never got it from our classmates, or I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
A couple of the older kids, yeah, I can't remember names or incidents or whatever, but there were a couple of other kids who, you know, several grades higher,
Yeah.
who I got it from, and also the vice principal.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should say his name or not.
No, don't say his name.
Yeah, you know, may rest in peace. But I think he just had a personal dislike for me, and my mother saw it too, and maybe that was one of the reasons. After fourth grade, my mother took me out of there.
Okay. Well, but there was no problems with any of the teachers then.
No. I mean, Miss Krause, you know, I loved her dearly. Miss Pratt she was a little scary.
She was what, the first grade?
That was first grade. Second grade was Miss Pont. No, not Miss Pont.
Pontes. Yeah, Pontes.
Yeah.
And then third grade was Lipinski. Third grade was Lipinski. Fourth grade was Mrs. Hagelin.
Yeah. And then after that, I was gone.
Yeah, and I think I left after fifth grade, and I can't remember who the fifth grade teacher was. I think it was a man, in fact.
Yeah, right. That's what I heard. Yeah.
So let me turn to a different direction, though, because other than being the only black kid in class until I believe it was third grade when Kevin Webster came. So for the first 4 years, you were the only black kid. But I didn't know until years later when we got in contact that you were also a Roman Catholic. And it's odd that you were from North Carolina, your folks came from, or your ancestors. How do you know the story of how you became a black Roman Catholic?
No, I mean, and really it wasn't pushed on me, I guess. I mean, when I said that I was baptized Catholic, that was pretty much the extent of it. I mean, I remember us going to church. When I say us, I mean, as a class, going to the church right next door.
Yeah.
I didn't feel any out of place or different, or that this is a different religion from what I'm used to or anything like that. I mean, I knew it was in school where I learned the Our Father and all of that, so I never felt out of place. I mean, I always saw St. John's Lutheran as the school, not so much the Lutheran religion.
Yeah.
Right? I think it was really just the school, and it was to me it was a good school. I mean, I tell people now, sometimes we talk about schools now, kids now, and I say, hey, I remember in fourth grade, my mother had to sign my homework every night.
Yeah.
Remember, Miss Hagelin made our parents, had to sign my homework every night, and so I didn't really feel out of place at all.
How about the Catholic Church on Sundays? Did you go to a Catholic church? Do you remember that?
Yeah, but it wasn't too often. Every once in a while, my mother dragged me, but it wasn't too often. And during those years, I had a cousin 6 years my senior. We were flip-flop weekends. One weekend I was at his home, the next weekend he was at mine. And I think the third weekend we did neither. But there were times when I was at his home when his mother, my aunt, would take us to church, and that was a Baptist church. So at that particular time, being 5, 6, 7 years old, church to me was just, I guess for choice of a better term, boring.
Yeah.
So I really didn't get too deep into one religion versus another religion, or learning it any particular way.
Let's go to first grade. What was the name of the teacher in first grade, did you say?
It was Pratt.
Pratt, okay. So that was when the class size sort of doubled, because we had the morning and afternoon kindergarten kids. Do you remember any of the kids that came, new, or do you have any memories of first grade?
Honestly, first grade is kind of like a blur to me, somewhat. I know it was an adjustment because now we were in class all day.
Yeah.
Um, I remember getting the chicken pox, and
Yeah.
I remember. Okay, what else was first grade? I probably still gravitated to those who were in our kindergarten class, just from a standpoint of those who are you and Karen and some of the others who I knew the
Yeah.
most from kindergarten, and also I remember as opposed to my security blanket, who was and by now he was in seventh grade. I think he was having trouble with his knees, and it seemed like he missed a lot of time. So I remember a lot of times going to school, taking those 2 long bus rides by myself, and at times it was a bit scary. At times it seemed like, and that was and my parents had divorced or separated the summer between kindergarten and first grade, so that first grade to me just seemed like one huge adjustment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like just so much in my young life, 6-year-old life, at the time it changed.
Yeah.
And so first grade just seemed like one, that school year of 71, 72 just seemed like one huge change, so to speak. Some good, some bad, but just seemed like one big change.
So I mentioned how I remember you going. You had missed some time even before you eventually left St. John's. Were you going through a lot of rough time dealing with your parents' divorce? You don't have to get into the specifics of why they broke up, but how did it affect you? And did your grades suffer?
Well, let me see. That happened between kindergarten and first grade. So, like I said, first grade was really just different, so to speak. I don't really remember my grades suffering that much. I know I had issues, or maybe I guess it was my belated, the choice of a better term, anger to it. Third grade was when I had, that's when I was getting into fights every day or whatever. So probably a lot, it was probably just internalizing it for first grade, second grade, so to speak, and then it came out third grade, so to speak, and I just it just manifested in a lot of anger and who you were with all day long, your classmates. So that's who I took it out on.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So I gave Miss Lipinski hell. God bless her. I gave her hell.
I remember you were sort of outside of the mainstream of the class because of the color of your skin. I was sort of outside the mainstream of the class because I came from, I guess, the wrong side of the tracks kind of thing. I was different than some of the other kids whose parents were, I guess, Wall Street bankers or whatnot. And there was, I won't mention her name, but there was one very fat girl who had big Coke bottle glasses, and she had a speech impediment. I won't say her name. Don't say her name, but you probably know who I'm talking about. And I remember that she was often very violent. I remember one time she did like Homer Simpson did to Bart to me, and she started just choking me because literally I was maybe 50, 60 pounds. She was over 100 pounds. She was literally twice as big as me. Uh, and I remember for the rest of that year, it must have been second or third grade, I just tormented her afterwards, just trying to get my revenge on her for choking me. And to this day, I still regret it, just like I regret the incident that I mentioned with you. Because I was smaller, and so unless she got her hands on me, I could sort of poke her or make fun of her and run away much quicker. Um, do you remember having any adversaries at any point in St. John's? Was in third grade, did you and a certain kid get into it
Ironically, Kevin and I, we fought, but it was
And
kind of
Kevin Webster was the second black kid who came into class
came in
during
third
third
grade.
grade. Yeah.
Yeah. We fought like brothers. We fought. The next day we made up. It was kind of like two brothers fighting. But let me see. But other than that, no real. Not that I can remember. Like I could point to say somebody who was a real adversary.
Yeah.
I gravitated to those even 5 years later in fourth grade. I still gravitated to you and some of the others who were in our afternoon kindergarten class, and some of the others I kind of just stayed away from, so
Yeah.
to speak. Um,
Um,
yeah.
so I remember when I remember there was a kid who was a year older than us, and he had just gone from fourth to fifth grade, and we were going to fourth grade. I remember the last day of third grade, him warning me about Mrs. Hagelin, that she was the
Yeah.
strictest teacher in school. But
Yeah.
I remember her as a very good teacher. Later on, she worked with my mom at a senior citizen center. Do you have any
Oh,
strong memories of her?
sure. Yeah. I mean, that was my last year there. It's funny. Even now, where I work, where you have to, if you can go online and get bank statements, things like that, they'll ask you, certain passwords or questions, like who's your favorite teacher.
Yeah.
You pick so that in case you forget your password, they'll ask you these questions so that
Yeah.
they know you're you.
Yeah.
And I'll put Hagelin.
Yeah.
I mean, I was one too. She was very very strict.
Yeah.
And she could be, but she was very fair. Um, I liked her.
Yeah.
I have no nightmarish stories about her.
Other than the Webster brothers, Niles Webster was, I think, a year, maybe two older than us. That was Kevin's older brother. And there was the Condon brothers, these Irish kids that came in that same year. And
Right.
I remember the Condon brothers were always getting into trouble once of one sort or another. Um, uh, so, uh, so you left. What do you? So, what school did you go to then after fourth grade?
School called St. Nicholas of Talentine. It's in Flushing on Parsons Boulevard and Union Turnpike. I know you're not familiar with Flushing, but that's where it was.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that was it. I was, sorry to go. I mean, it's because ironically, after whatever, issues I had in third grade, by the time fourth grade came along, I was my old self again.
Yeah.
And, I love fourth grade. I won't mention her name, but there was a girl, an eighth grader who I just, I mean, loved to death. So as far as getting up and getting dressed and getting to school on time, never a problem.
Yeah.
And if you remember, we always had like a little assembly thing where we had to go downstairs because fourth grade we were upstairs.
Okay.
For some reason, we had to go downstairs for something, some kind of assembly or something like that.
Yeah.
And I would always just look in the window to eighth grade. And, yeah, there she is. So at the end of I don't remember the circumstances, but I know that for whatever reason, I don't know why, it was like it was like don't say anything about changing schools, so I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to anybody.
Yeah.
And I know the first day of fifth grade, obviously nobody saw me. When I got home, Kevin called me. He's like, where are you? And I said, hey, listen, man, I switched schools. I'm hoping I get back there one day. But I knew in my heart that my mother wasn't going to put me back in St. John's. But
Yeah.
And finally, to this day, my mother says I should have never taken you out of that school.
Yeah.
Once I went there, the racism was blatant.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get too deep. I don't want to get into Bible situations, but it was blatant from my classmates, their parents, the faculty.
Was that a private school you went to?
Excuse me?
Was that a private school?
It was Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah. My godmother's family had gone there. She has a daughter, one my age and another one 2 years older than me, and the third daughter was like 7 years younger, so she wasn't in the school yet. So that was really my leeway into getting into that school. But they didn't have any problems because they were there from first grade, whereas I come in as an outsider in fifth grade, and after school everybody goes one way to Flushing, and I go the other way to Jamaica. So from there it was like I was an outsider.
Yeah. Did you go there through junior high, or did you to eighth grade and then go straight to high school?
Yeah, it was fifth grade through eighth grade. So, I started Jamaica High School in ninth grade.
Okay. So you went to Jamaica High School. Is that located on Jamaica Avenue?
Yeah. It's about maybe a 20-minute bus ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind
I
of a
remember
high
that.
school was that? Was that mostly black, mostly Puerto Rican? What was it mixed?
It was straight down the middle, black and white. And it's ironic I said at the time that it was mixed, like right down the middle, but for the most part, the black kids hung together and the white kids hung together. And it's like you didn't really realize how many white kids were in your graduating class until graduation time.
Yeah.
Uh, but I mean, and there were never any racial issues there. Because you had blacks, whites, Hispanics, whatever nationalities, all in the same classes.
Yeah.
But socially, most of the blacks hung together, and the whites hung together. Sports were the rage then too, because in ninth grade, if you remember, that's when Larry Bird and Magic Johnson entered the NBA. So that was the whole rage, and sports are universal. So you can talk sports with anybody.
Yeah. So how did you do in high school? Were you a good high school student?
Yes, I did good, but it was I guess in high school it was kind of like, why should I bust my ass, for choice of a better term, to get an A when I can why should I bust my ass to get a 90 when I can get an 85 on natural intelligence, so to speak? So I didn't really push myself in high school the way I should have, and then my last 3 years of high school I had a part-time job, so that kind of, I guess, somewhat interfered with being totally focused.
Yeah.
You have interest in girls then, interest in sports. So there was just, a lot going on that to not really just totally focus on getting 95, 90, and just doing the absolute best I can. In fact, I remember senior year, my homeroom teacher, I think she taught another class, maybe something, it was a small class that wasn't difficult to pass. And then one time she pulled me aside and says, when you get to the next level, really assert yourself. I know you did good, but I know you could do great. So, really assert yourself. And that always stayed with me.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned that Jamaica High School was not that violent, because I went to Franklin K. Lane High School, which was right on the Brooklyn-Queens border by Forest Park, and that was a shithole. I mean, literally, we had to go through metal detectors every day. It was like a prison camp. It was about a third white, a third black, and a third Hispanic, and all the Hispanics hated the blacks, who hated the whites, who hated the Hispanics, who hated the blacks, who hated the everyone hated each other there. I'm not me, but I'm talking in general terms. And there was a black gang that came from Jamaica on the J line, and then there was a Hispanic gang, and I was actually the only white kid in a Hispanic gang. And then there were two white gangs. There was we called, well, there were the skinhead neo-Nazis, and then there was what we called the white trashers. And I just have so many like typical New York stories. I remember one pregnant Puerto Rican girl standing on a ledge on the third or fourth story, threatening to jump off, and a cherry picker fire truck having to come in to rescue her. It was just a very bizarre time. But the one thing I did want to ask you is, I remember in 81 or 82, this was when the Atlanta child murders were going on, and a lot of black people started wearing yellow ribbons, because I think there were red ribbons worn for the Iran hostages. So when the black kids started getting killed, they initially thought it was the Ku Klux Klan down in Georgia. Turned out to be this black fella who was, I guess, a pedophile or whatnot. But I remember there being race riots at my school, and the black kids on the school bus had to be escorted by cops one way, the white kids another way, the Hispanics another way, because there was all these tensions. Do you remember anything about the Atlanta child murders? Were people wearing those yellow ribbons at your school?
Sure, I remember, and you're right on point about the it was like 81, 80, 81, 82. I think it was 82 when they caught the guy.
Yeah.
But sure, I remember that. Yeah, but there were no race. If anything, when my high school years, I mean, I was I wasn't really far from being a tough guy, but I think you had to worry about maybe some bully stealing your money, or I've heard instances where guys got people had their sneakers stolen and things, that kind of thing. But
Uh-huh.
I didn't get taken off too often.
Do you have any? You mentioned the one teacher who gave you some a compliment. Are there any other teachers, say in high school, or that you recall?
Uh, well,
Because I'll tell you, I remember in junior high school, I went to junior high school. I remember there was this science teacher named Ronald Wallenfels, and I remember he used to, he taught boys how to use a condom on a banana. I remember he brought in a Vietnam vet who talked about the war. And I remember this Vietnam vet telling how he once was up in a tree spying the Viet Cong, and he had to make a choice. He saw a little kid coming up, and the little kid saw him up in the tree. So he had to make a choice to kill the kid to save his troop from being found out, his guys. And he talked about having to kill this kid. And I still remember the guy felt such guilt over having to kill this. So it was either this child's life or 30 lives of American soldiers or whatnot.
right.
I was just wondering if there were any teachers that did stuff like that you remember, that went out
Not
of
that
their
I
way.
recall. It was pretty. The teachers, other than were pretty basic.
Yeah,
You taught the lesson. None that I particularly got close to or anything like that. And there were even some teachers who I had maybe two or three times during the course of 4 years there.
yeah,
But some were better, some were better than others. Some were didn't really put the fear of God in you.
yeah.
Uh, but other than none that really, ironically, none that really stand out.
Yeah. I want to just mention before we'll end this segment and we'll talk for your college years on. But I wanted to just before we move on, I wanted to bring up the names of two of the kids that I knew we knew from St. John's who died early. One we mentioned Kevin Webster, and I think we both found out about 10 years ago when you had let me know you I guess got in contact online with Niles Webster, Kevin's older brother, that he had died of AIDS back in the
Yeah.
90s. Um,
Right.
and I remember a girl named Donna Baumgarten, and
Yeah, I remember her.
yeah, I
Yeah.
remember when I was about 22, a few years after high school, Karen Blash, this girl Barbara Meyer, no, was it
I
Barbara
remember
Meyer?
her.
Uh, Diana Perthen, and a couple of other people. We got together at a bar one Friday or Saturday night. About 7 or 8 of us, and I remember her telling me that Donna Baumgarten had gotten decapitated in a motorcycle
Yeah.
accident. Um,
Yeah.
and so I just do you if you don't have to name a name if there's anything upsetting, but do you have any? Are there any other of the kids that stand out in your mind, one way or the other, that you may have heard something bad happen to, or that they became a success or something? Any of the St. John's kids?
Uh, no, I mean, well, I just know what you told me about Donna Baumgartner and Kevin. I guess we kind of found at the same time,
Yeah,
and really just once Facebook became the rage, I guess I think it was around 2009, and we found his brother. I said, okay, why doesn't Kevin have a page, or why am I
yeah,
not seeing any pictures here or there? And you reached out to him, and I remember I was at work getting ready to leave. That's when I got your email and said, "Hey, Mark, Kevin died," and you told me how, and I was just so upset about it. I just figured
yeah.
at some point I would just run into him one day, or something like that, and that would be that. As far as any horror stories from any of the other kids, no. The few who we did find on Facebook, everybody seems to just, be a fucking schmo like us.
Yeah. I know that I had mentioned that when I went to Franklin K. Lane, there were probably about 7 or 8 kids that were from St. John's who had graduated from St. John's and had gone to Franklin K. Lane, and they were there a year earlier because I had gone to public school and I went to junior high, which was 7th through 9th. So I did high
Okay.
school from 10th to 12th. So they, when they graduated from St. John's, went straight to 9th grade. So they were there actually a year before me. But the only two out of the 7 or 8 kids from St. John's who were friendly or to me were Karen Blash and Barbara Meyer. and the rest of them sort of ignored me. I remember going up to a few of them, and for some reason, I'd say, "Hey, how you doing, so and so," and they just like ignored me. They were, I guess, I wasn't cool enough for them. Have you ever run into any of the kids from St. John's in any other walks of life other than say on Facebook? Uh,
Uh, no, other than Facebook, I have had no contact with any of them. And I know we've discussed that, off screen about, your experiences with some of our
yeah,
classmates. And, it's funny. It's like despite what I went through at the school that I went to after I left St. John's, part of me says, well, you know what? Maybe it's best that your memories of these kids stops
yeah,
at fourth grade
yeah,
when we also had that certain innocence about us, and we were all friends, or at least that perception of friends.
yeah.
Because maybe by the time we got to seventh or eighth grade, maybe those friendships would have changed as well.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Well, it's interesting because when I left after fifth grade, a big, tall German kid named Kurt Brand also
Yeah,
left, and we both went to PS 113 together. And then he left midway through the sixth grade, and I think he moved to Connecticut. And I had sent him a thing on Facebook about 3 years ago, and only about 3 or 4 months ago did he discover it and friended me back. Hopefully, I'll get to maybe talk with him at some time in the future too
okay,
to
yeah,
find out about that stuff. So I was just wondering if you had anything. So let's end this segment here. And then I want to ask you a
okay,
bit about your life in college and your working life after. And we'll do that in a moment. This is my first Biorama interview, and it's appropriate that other than my sister, Marc Taylor, who I'm speaking to, probably he and I probably go back farther than anyone, at least in my life. And so, Marc, let me ask you about your college life. Where did you go to college, and what did you study?
I went to a small school in a place called Hampton, Virginia. It was called Hampton Institute when I went in, and I think it was after sophomore year the name changed to Hampton University.
Uh-huh.
Why I don't know. Uh, College was I'm gonna say it's a predominantly black school.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of had narrowed my choices down between. I knew I wanted to go to school out of state,
Yeah.
because I wanted to go someplace small where there's like really nothing to do but study, because I just figured I would get too distracted, too many distractions here in New York to do what I wanted to do. So and that's I kind of it wasn't planned. I kind of just fell into it, and that's where I ended up.
And what did you study?
Accounting,
Counting.
and even that was kind of strange because uh, even as late as my senior year in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, you have to pick a major. I said, well, I've always been pretty decent in math, so let me try this. And I took like accounting my final 2 semesters of high school. And I did well, so that kind of just fell into it.
So for you, accounting was just a way to get by. Did you have any passions? Like, I mean, I know I write poetry. I've written stuff, and I try to get published here. I won't get into all the shit of the publishing world. But did you ever have any dreams of art or sports or anything, or were you more just grounded?
Oh, you say sports? You mean as far as playing?
Yes, I mean, did you want to one day be a guard for the New York Knicks, but you couldn't do it?
Well, you know what? I was never the best in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Even I was mediocre, so I knew right then and there that as far as making it to the pros in any sport, that was out of the question. So a lot of kids in my neighborhood had professional aspirations, didn't come anywhere near it, but in many ways, their academic slash professional lives were in some ways compromised because they were cutting class shooting hoops all day long as opposed to going to school, and
Yeah.
in some ways they were affected by it. But I knew from day one that I wasn't good enough to play pro ball.
So after you graduated, did you come right back to New York?
Yeah, it's ironic because midway through, I think when I came home Thanksgiving, um, my junior year, my best friend and I, we somehow managed to get into this nightclub called the Silver Shadow. It was on
Yeah.
57th and 6th. And you had to be 23 to get in there.
Yeah.
And this was 1985. I was 20. He was 19, but he had a beard and mustache. So if they were gonna call anybody, it was gonna be me. I mean, you see me now at age 51. You could imagine how I looked at age 20. Nowhere near 23. I'm 6'2", weighing 150 pounds. Nowhere near. But we had our trench coats and everything, and we got in. But make a long story short, to get to your question, I mean, I fell in love with that place. And anytime when I came home, spring break, the summer, if somebody was coming to New York and they had space in their car, and I was just, I went there or someplace. So I really fell in love with the New York City nightlife. So once I graduated, I caught the first thing smoking back to New York, and really to primarily just because I wanted to hang out. I was just drawn to that nightlife. So yeah, I went after school. I came right back to New York, and I almost midway through my sophomore year, I wanted to not drop. I wanted to change schools. I just didn't really feel. I felt out of place there. It was just I was like, yeah, this just isn't for me. And when I came home for spring break, I told myself that, okay, go back and do your last 7 weeks, and then you're done. I was going to go to Baruch, and I think what happened was I brought a book home for spring break to study because I know we had an upcoming class maybe a week or so after I got back. And with everything going on, I didn't crack that book once, And my father said, you know what, go back there, finish your last 2 years, and get your sheet of paper and be done coming back, and come back to New York. And that's really the way it was. I mean, the ends justify the means. I did graduate from there, but it really wasn't my thing going there.
I know that once I graduated from high school, I mean, the last few years of my life here, I've had some ups and downs, both with medical stuff and then with some job stuff that I lost a job because I reported a company that was breaking the law that I was working for, and they screwed me over and whatnot. So I've had ups and downs, and I know my wife has sometimes gotten on me for not ever going to college. But when I got out of high school, it was like, okay, you just get a job, and I got some blue collar jobs, and I got full-time work, and I was doing decent money. And when I was 26, I moved out of New York after I'd found my biological family because I'm adopted, and so I moved to Minnesota to try to take a new life. My dad had died when I was 18. He had told me, he sort of charged me with taking care of my mother. So I told my mom, you got to come along with me because I got to get out of New York and whatnot. What was your relationship with your parents in the early, in your 20s, say, when you were just starting out in your life?
Let's see. Graduating college, coming back to New York, I didn't really get a job making the kind of money that I should have, or that my grades would have warranted. And I just hate the whole job interviewing process. So I kind of just settled with being there, and so that at times came in to generate some conflict between my mother and I, so to speak. Like, okay, well, it's time for you to get serious and take a study for your CPA. And I was like, I really don't want to do that. So that was that. But that was, I guess, really the only conflict I had.
And is your mother still alive?
Yeah.
Okay.
To some extent that was with my father as well. But overall, that's just the only real ripple, so to speak. Other than that, for the most part, in my 20s and any since then, I've gotten along with my parents, pretty well. Like I said, I think part of, looking back now, really from the time that we started kindergarten, it was kind of ingrained in me that, okay, you're gonna go to college, and after college, you got this big part of gold is at the end of the rainbow waiting
Yeah.
for you when you're 22 years old and you have your college degree. And when that happened, when I got okay, it's like okay, I'm 22 years old. I did everything I was supposed to do. I went through grade school. I went through high school. Went through college. And other than third grade, there really were no ripples here. Okay, where's this pot of gold that was supposed to be waiting for me since I was 5 years old? And they're like, oh, well, now you need to go to grad school.
Yeah.
Well, no, I really don't want to do that because this pot of gold is supposed to be here for me now at undergrad. So a lot of, in retrospect, a lot of the frustration that came with that, I was kind of drowning myself in New York City nightlife. I mean, it was not because I worked in Midtown Manhattan, so anywhere you want to go, it was right there.
Yeah.
So again, no real ripples from my parents, but and sometimes it was like, okay, what's going on? You all of this hang out that like it's not really who you are because I didn't really I didn't really start quote unquote. I don't even want to use the term running the streets because it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And I really didn't start doing that until I got out of school, so to speak. And really, I did it from the time I got out of school at 22 until maybe 28, 29.
Yeah.
Just hanging out.
Well, let me just ask about. Well, let me just preface it with sort of my life in the 20s, especially like romantically. I know I got involved in the art scene in New York, so I was sort of this blue collar guy by day, but at nights I would go once or twice a week, sometimes into Manhattan, and or sometimes down into Brooklyn where they had the warehouses and they'd have these like underground art stuff, and I'd meet a lot of people, different black, white, gay, straight, Jewish, Christian, whatever. A lot of diverse people, and I'd meet a lot of girls, and but I never before I got married to my wife when I was in my mid 30s. I can't really say I ever had a steady girlfriend. The longest I ever went with a woman was about 2 months, and we'd get together. You'd have a one night stand here or there. You'd whatever, go away for a weekend here or there, but nothing permanent. And especially in the art scene, it was difficult because a lot of artistic people generally, and women especially, are very, very kind of crazy when it comes to a lot of things like that. What was I know you had said that you had gotten married at one point briefly. What was your like romantic life? And I don't, you don't have to get specific, but did you have a number of steady girlfriends over the years, or were you just sort of playing the field?
Ironically, the way you described your 20s was kind of like mine.
Yeah.
I can't really point to a girlfriend who I had from age like 23 to 26 or something like that. No, it was. At one time I was in the arts, and because when I graduated, Spike Lee had just done what was his first one? She's Got to Have It, and Robert Townsend
Yeah.
was doing Hollywood Shuffle. So that was kind of the rage of African American filmmakers making money, making films dirt cheap. And I had written a couple of things, and I had kind of in a small little segment became like this big celebrity, so to speak, locally, because I had written this screenplay and was trying to get it done independently the whole bit.
Yeah.
So that kind of brought me in touch with certain people in quote unquote the arts.
Yeah.
So it's funny, kind of the way you described your girlfriend situation. It was in many ways like that with mine in the 20s. I mean, the relationships that I was in did not last long.
Yeah, it's odd. I've often said that the women that I did get with, either sexually or dated for a while, I barely remember, and the women that never wanted me but I thought were right for me, and I would write love poems to or something. Those were the ones that stick the most in my memory. So it was like the girls that I couldn't get, they stick in my mind, but some of the women that I might have, slept with when I was 24, I don't remember them, even their faces or names. And I know it's a stereotype that people will say about men, and a lot of women bitch about it, but it's true. It's like, so was that sort of similar to the way you were, that these people just sort of washed in and out of your life?
Yeah, and then too, being in corporate America, there were some women who I just like flat out like, oh my God, look at that, and who I, perhaps pursue. I mean, didn't get anywhere with. I'm carrying, literally carrying 155 pounds on a 6'2" frame.
Yeah.
No real money. And that was kind of part of my motivation when I was trying to get into, make my way in the arts. Of this, okay, I'm gonna write and produce and make this film, make a whole bunch of money, and then everybody's gonna come. The world's gonna be at my feet. But yeah, those who I pursued in my 20s kind of are a bit more etched in my memory, as opposed to the quote unquote short-lived relationships that I had, so to speak. Yeah. So.
Now, I had asked you. You had mentioned. I think we talked about it once a few years back. You don't have to mention her name, but you were briefly married. What was that situation? I remember it was an odd situation that you were married.
Yeah.
Briefly.
Let me see. Well, at the time I got married, I was 32, and she was 40.
Okay.
After a while, I started taking an express bus to work every day, and the bus was predominantly women, and most people who rode the bus got on in my neighborhood. She got on a little further down, but Kew Gardens, and so I just for about a year or two, just in passing, because I just noticed each other. I didn't say anything. I was just kind of awed by her, so to speak. But in '96, when my first book came out, I was kind of the local celebrity on the bus. In fact, a lot of those women really went out of their way to support. It was times like I would get on the bus with a shopping bag full of books, and by the time the bus got to 49th Street, Madison Avenue, I had $400 in my hands. It was like that. Women there, they would have book signs for me at their job, the whole bit. So, make a long story short, it was like, getting back to my then wife, it was like we touched base. I think it was May of '97, and from mid-May through end of June, we did lunch maybe once a week, once every 10 days. I didn't really sweat it because I didn't want to come off as some love-struck, immature kid, so to speak. Things picked up in July of '97, and next thing I knew, August 1st, we were engaged. We got married in December.
How long did it last?
Not even a year.
No.
Not even a year. Along the way, I found out that I was husband number 3, and that both number 1 and number 2 also lasted less than a year.
Yeah.
It was just a bad situation, so to speak. All the way around. I was, never told you, but there were days where I wanted out of here, so to speak. Not that I would actually pursue it, but it just I was just that miserable, so to speak. And then it just got, it just, I don't know, just one thing after another. And I just, thankfully we had, we didn't have any children, no joint property, anything like that, and even we had no mutual friends or travel in the same circle. So once I decided I wanted out, I just bounced.
Yeah. Let me ask about corporate America, so let's say by the time you hit your mid-30s, once you got married and then divorced, were you feeling sort of like you were treading water? Did you ever encounter, say, a blatant bigotry within the corporate world? Like, did you reach a glass ceiling at any of your firms?
Yeah, there was a there was a situation really as early as when I was 25, 1990. A job that anybody and their mother knew should have been mine. I got passed over for somebody else looking out for their own. And even then, my mother has always said, once you didn't get that job, you should have left that company. And she's probably right. But then again, you never know the path that you led down.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have ended up taking a job on the 89th floor of one of the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my saving grace for thinking that I should have been out of this company a long time ago. The racism, it was subtle. As far as glass ceiling, things getting passed over was, there was always a shop bed full of excuses why somebody else got it and not you. And they would tell somebody, well, hey, I lost out to the better person. But other times it was, what's going on here? If I had to do it all over again, I probably would not have stayed with my company as long as I did. Again, I just simply hate the whole job interviewing process, so to speak. It was like a phobia at one time. So, and I guess too, I just had so many other outside interests going between, the books and everything, and I never really discussed. When you work in corporate America, the only thing they want to know about is corporate America. So to say that you have outside interests, especially something that's in depth as writing a book, I just never discussed that with anybody.
Yeah, I know my wife and I say that too, that we don't really, it's very few people I've worked with that I've talked about being involved in the arts, because if like she's a woman, if she says she's a poet, they're like, oh, are you suicidal like Sylvia Plath? Or if, I talk about writing or whatnot, they think you're supposed to act a certain way, and it's, I think the arts in this country, unfortunately, are not in the best shape, and people get a certain kind of reaction to when you mention that kind of thing. So let me just ask about your books here, because as I mentioned when I interviewed you 12, 13 years ago, you had a couple of books that you'd written about soul music. How did you get into that, other than, obviously you were listening to the music as a kid? What prompted you to go out and seek some of these old-time singers and interview them?
It's funny. The so-called press release is that I grew up listening to all this music, and I never lost my love for it. So once the opportunity was there, I just took it upon myself to interview all of these people again, and put it into a book. But that's really not the way it happened, so to speak. Once disco music came into the region, I guess I'm going to say 1975, and so a lot of the soul music was kind of like swept under the wayside.
Yeah.
I like disco music.
Yeah.
I never got really into the hip hop, rap, that whole thing. I just never got into it. But ironically, when I was in college, one of the big radio stations there, for like 3 or 4 hours, they would play nothing but old music. And it's like, wow, I'm hearing these songs I've heard since I was a little boy. And as I mentioned, one of my the places where I hung out in my 20s, one was this place on 68th and Amsterdam called Sweetwaters, and a lot of the 70s groups performed there. It was like, and you would see it on the marquee. Like one week, the Moments were going to be there, and the second week, the Stylistics, and the third week, Billy Paul might be there. And I'm seeing all these groups for free because they had a glass partition that separated the bar area from the restaurant area, but you could just lean against glass partition and see everything just fine. So, when was it? 1990, I think. I started writing for this small newspaper, just something I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And most of whom I wrote about were these groups from the 70s. That was my niche, and the publisher really liked that music, so I was the soul music guy. And at the time, nobody was beating a path to interview these groups, these artists. So for the most part, they were glad for me to do it.
Yeah.
And I guess after about a year or so, I kind of realized, okay, well, you know what? you're not going to make any money working at this paper, and even if money does start coming in, if this paper really does blow up, there's so many people who are going to be taken care of before anything filters down to you. So the best thing to do is get what you can out of it.
Yeah.
You know, so I said, okay, well, you've interviewed this one, you've interviewed that one, you've interviewed so and so. Why don't you just take? And at the time, soul music was becoming fashionable again. A lot of the black radio stations were going to a classic soul format, so I kind of sensed that it was coming back into fashion.
Yeah.
And that was around the time where the whole the whole CD rage started.
Yeah.
So a lot of these old albums were being re-released in CD format, and greatest hits were being released on CD format. So it was all coming back, and I just figured, okay, well, this club here still has, I made a list of who I wanted to interview. And I said, okay, this one goes to Sweet Waters, this one performs at Sweet Waters, this one performs at Sweet Waters. You can probably knock this thing off in about a year and a half tops. As fate would have it, Sweet Waters closed about a year or so into me doing this together. And then I was like, okay, wow, how do I get in touch with these people? Because then there was no Facebook, no internet or anything. So it wasn't like these groups had websites with a little contact page where, call so-and-so. And it was like whatever works. And some artists put me in touch with others. Some, if they actually wrote their songs, I could get in touch with them through BMI or ASCAP. And if some who had a new CD or album out, I could always do a story on them for the paper, and after the interview say, okay, this is for the paper. Can you give me another 15, 20 minutes of your time or half hour of your time? I'm doing this book. So what I thought was going to take a year actually took 4 years just to chase everybody down for interviews. And once I started researching the industry, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to spend another 3 or 4 years trying to find a publisher. Learn the industry while you're chasing these people down, and hustle up the money and put it out yourself. Because you're going to have to end up doing most of the work anyway. So, in a nutshell, that's what happened. Ironically, it was my ex-wife who was, I don't want to say talked me into it, but in a way it was kind of the catalyst for me doing the second book. And that one I had a track record by then. So it just took 2 years' time to knock off the second book, which was, a follow-up to the first one, the covering the groups from the late 70s, like the Earth, Wind, and Fires. That one kind of bombed. When I say bombed as far as sales-wise, of the 3 books I've written, it's probably the best one as far as content, what I put into it and everything. Yeah. But, sequels more people like Jaws than they did Jaws 2. Yeah. More people like Rocky than they did Rocky 2. Sequels never do as good as the original. So that was the case. And I think I was someplace selling my books, and a lady who was affiliated with the Marvelettes, if you remember the group, well, they were well before our time. Yeah. But I'm sure you've heard the song Please Mr. Postman or Don't Mess with Bill. Those were the 2 biggest hits. Asked me if I would be interested in doing something with them. I said, okay, well, hey, I would love to have my name affiliated with something Motownish. And she put me in touch with 2 of the original members of the group. And that was a bit challenging because in doing my first 2 books, I was asking people in the mid to late 90s to recall their careers from the 1970s. But with the Marvelettes book, I was asking people in the millennium to recall their careers from the early 60s. Yeah. And it was a bit of a challenge. One participated fully, one participated here and there. One's deceased, one had left the group after about a year, and one kind of just got caught up in the dark side of the industry, so interviewing her was out of the question. It was a challenge. In a way, you kind of see that a lot of these artists who both of us still have adverse feelings towards Berry Gordy. And in some ways, I had to deal with, well, I didn't get my money from Motown when I was right out here singing and performing every night. So I'm going to make it up by trying to get that money from you. Mm. So that was kind of conflicting. I really don't want to get too deep into that. Yeah. That was rough. It kind of still somewhat leaves a sour taste in my mouth, so to speak. We had a big falling out. It ended up being a big headache like right away.
Well, let's move beyond that, because I know we reconnected about in the early O's, and I did an interview with you for a radio show that I was doing at the time, and so after the turn of the century into the early 21st century, you're in your mid-30s and whatnot. What was your life like then, and has it changed much, or do you sometimes feel that you're in a rut? What has gone on, say, the last 15 or so years of your life? Do you feel good where you are in your life at this point?
Well, let me see. As far as where I am right now, maybe you've seen me posting things on Facebook. I know your better half has. I formed a charity that makes sandwich packages. And I say packages, sandwich, turkey and cheese sandwich, piece of fruit, and those Capri Sun fruit drinks that you stick the straw in. Yeah. Do that, and twice a month, we, depending on if I need somebody, we'll deliver them to shelters, family shelters, and once a month we'll actually hit the streets of Midtown Manhattan and actually feed people who are like literally living and sleeping in the street. That's grown. I've been doing it. I initially started doing it through the church in 2014. That kind of waned a bit. Certain people left here and there, and then it just died. And I took it upon myself to do it a bit here and there. And in September of 2015, I actually incorporated. I managed to get 501c3 certification, which that's what separates legitimate nonprofit charity from someone's down the street who runs a daycare out of their room, out of their spare room, so to speak. So that's kind of my life right now. So I'm in a good place with that. I enjoy it. As far as personally, I've been seeing the same lady for the last 9 years. She tolerates me, so to speak. And I say that, so to speak, because she tolerates that I don't have a lot of time on my hands. Mm-hmm. But it's not like, well, we can't get together Friday night because I'm stopping to have a few brews with the boys. It's Saturday morning. I have to get up because I have to meet somebody at 8:30. I have to meet somebody at Penn Station at 8:30. That's when we're going to get started doing these sandwiches. So we kind of have to call it kind of early Friday night. So that can get frustrating.
Well, let me just ask, even in my youth, for example, I was never a big party guy. I mean, I would go to these artistic events, and some people would be drinking and whatnot, but I was never the kind of young guy that would go to someone's house on a weekend and just party or whatnot. It sounds to me that that wasn't your scene either.
No, it wasn't either. In fact, really, I didn't start until after I got out of college, when I started running the streets in my 20s, and even then, it was like, okay, well, I guess this is the thing to do that most people in their 20s do, so to speak. And even when I entered a nightclub or bar or whatever, I need to, like, first thing before I did anything was just like put down 2 or 3 drinks just to get myself up to get through the night. But it never really was my thing, so to speak. But it was like, well, I mean, I had no problem just being a homebody, but I guess you could see this being weird by doing that. So I was kind of pushed, you need to be out doing this and that, blah, 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 blah. But it was never really my thing. So, as far as like where my life is now, I would say within the past 6 or 7 years, I'm kind of in a good place. I think I may have told you my father he's not in the best of physical health. So that's, his days kind of become my bad days, emotionally. For the most part, I just kind of, I'm kind of numb to the situation, whereas I just go and do what I got to do, and when I need to have a emotional moment, I I do. I live alone, so I can just release that on my own whenever I feel like it.
Does your father live near to you? Is he?
He's about half hour by car.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in a what do you call it? Independent facility for seniors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me just ask a little bit about, because you talked about doing these charity stuff. And I know a few times, because probably we've averaged talking maybe once a year, maybe over the last 14, 15 years or something. So we've talked maybe 12 to 15, 16 times over the years by phone for an hour or two. Let me just ask about your religious views. Earlier you stated that you were raised Roman Catholic. Are you a believer in God? Are you religious? Do you go to church on Sundays?
Absolutely, yeah.
What church do you go to?
Church called St. Albans Congregational Church. It's United Church of Christ type. Well, I don't even know where to begin. It's really like part of my life, so to speak. It's kind of like an automatic pilot. It's as natural for me as going to my job, so to speak.
Yeah.
As far as in my religious, my closest to God helps me deal with whatever I'm dealing with my father, whatever nonsense at work or whatever. I'm not the most outgoing. I shouldn't say. I'm not the most open person.
But yet you're doing this interview.
Yeah. I was just figuring, okay, how can I put that? Yeah, I'm doing this interview. Maybe I wouldn't do this for anybody, so to speak.
Yeah.
But hey, you and I go back to when we were 5 years old,
Yeah.
and age 5 to age 10, we were in the same class every day. So that was, that's something that's dear to me. So I'm not really the most open person, so a lot of issues that I may have or whatever, I take it to God as opposed to taking it to someone else, so to speak. So
when I was in my early 20s, I was involved with an organization called the Ridgewood Democratic Club, and I remember for 3 or 4 years I worked on campaigns for local politicians, and I remember, I think it was in 1989. Oh, no, 87, 88, something, when David Dinkins first ran for mayor. I guess it was 88 or 89 against Ed Koch. Ed Koch was running for a 4th term. And I remember I got really, because Dinkins was the first black mayor of New York and only black mayor of New York. And I remember I supported Dinkins. I thought it was time for Koch to go. And I remember it frustrated me that the Democratic Club I was working for decided to support Koch without even listening to inviting any Dinkins supporters over. They were probably 98% white. There was maybe 1 or 2 black people in that club. And that sort of reminded me of like this, as we're recording here in the year 2016, it sort of reminded me of what Hillary Clinton did this year with the Democratic nominee, is that she sort of rigged the system so that Bernie Sanders or anyone else couldn't beat her. And I remember that when the Democratic Club didn't even put for a vote for who the club should support. And that sort of drifted me away. And over the years, I consider myself a political independent. Do you have strong political views? And are you an independent, a Republican, a Democrat? What?
I usually vote Democrat. I'll tell you, I voted for Hillary. I voted for Obama the 2 times that he ran.
Yeah.
Before that, I voted for Kerry. Before that, I voted for Gore. Before that, to my knowledge, I probably voted for Clinton twice. So I generally vote Democrat. It's funny. I remember one time we were talking about those who have been president just in our lifetime, and just saying, we went through Nixon and Ford and Carter and Reagan, the whole bit. so to
Yeah.
speak. Other than voting, in fact, to be honest with you, other than voting, I'm not politically active at all. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's good or bad, but that's just the gist of it. I'm really not politically active.
Yeah, I know. As I've gotten older, and I've been arguing with some younger people online. I'm like, I'm not. I couldn't stand Trump back in the '80s when he first became famous, and
Yeah,
but by the
same
same
here.
token, I was not a big Hillary Clinton fan. I voted this year. I voted Green Party. I voted for Obama twice. I voted for Ralph Nader the 3 times before that, and before that, I voted for the Democrats. So I'm a social liberal. But by the same token, I'd love to have 5 or 6 major parties rather than two.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah,
Um,
I would agree.
so because you're now, as I said, just a month younger than me. I'm going to be 52 in February, so you'll be 52 in March. Um, as you look towards your life, like you said, you have no kids. I have no kids that I know of. Um, uh,
Yeah.
do you have any big regrets? And are they regrets in terms of career choices? Are they regrets in terms of, say, issues with your parents? Are they regrets with, say, never, say, finding or marrying again? I mean, you said you have a woman for almost a decade now, but I mean, do you have, if you have regrets, in what area of your life do they lie in?
Uh, yeah, it's funny. You can always look back and say things you would have done differently. Um, I can, if I had to do it all over again, there may be other women who I would have pursued.
Uh-huh.
Um, maybe I would have pursued the so-called American dream of the wife, the house, 2.5 kids, so to speak. Maybe I
Right.
wouldn't have. Maybe I would have considered other options as opposed to catching the first thing smoking back to New York after graduating. Uh, and I guess at least career-wise, ironically, it's like now that I'm doing this charity, and maybe that's why I'm so passionate about it, because it's like, okay, well, maybe everything in life has led me to do this, so to speak, and this is
Uh-huh.
God's will. God's will for me. So if that's the case, I guess the ends justify the means, so to speak. Can I honestly say, do I wish I had children? Perhaps. But there's responsibility that goes with that. Who knows if
Yeah.
if I can regrets. I shouldn't have married who I did at age 32.
Uh-huh.
And even those closest to me or were close to me at that time, even said, Mark, throughout that whole process, you just didn't seem like yourself. I mean, even the months, I say years, it was just months. The way I was leading up to the marriage,
Yeah.
so to speak, it's like, yeah, Mark, you just didn't seem like yourself, so to speak. So if there's anything that I could, I guess, undo, so to speak, it would be that. And without going into any detail, someone else who I dated from, let's say, actually January 2001 to January 2004. That was a situation I just really had no business being there at all. I just don't want to get into that, but or at least not on here. But yeah, so if anything, those two. I mean, so we can all look back and say you should have. I say hindsight is always 20/20. You can also look back and say you should have, could have, would have done something differently. But everything that I've done has led me to this point. We can all use some more money,
Yeah.
so to speak. And perhaps if I had the wife, the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids, maybe I wouldn't be in a position to devote the time that I need to my father. So it's just like this is the hand I've been dealt. I did did what I did with it. Some of it, some of the blessings that I've gotten, I've wasted. Some I haven't. So
Well,
it's like, hey, this is where I am.
Well, let me ask about looking forward to the future, because one of the reasons that I want to do these interviews, and hopefully I'll do a few dozen of them, is so that 50 or 100 or 200 years from now, whatever replaces the internet, someone maybe read some of my work or my wife's work might stumble upon these interviews and say, "Boy, that was quite interesting that he was interviewing all these people that he grew up with or knew." And finding about the lives of ordinary people. Let me first ask about your ideas of the future for in society, what you think of the future in general, and then specifically, because we're both 51, and so I know I try to save as much money. You try to put in 401ks or that kind of thing. Let me just ask about your own ideas, because uh, since we are 51, I think a statistician or what's the term that an actuary would say we're probably going to both live to maybe around 80, 81. Maybe because you're a black male, you might have a year or two less than me on average, but we both have probably about 3 decades left if we live an average lifespan. Do you think about the future? Do you think about growing old? Do you think about uh, who will take care of me like you're taking care of your father?
Uh, yeah. I think about that in some ways. The future. It's the oxymoron here is like I'm sitting here telling you how much I lean on God. On the other hand, I'm afraid of the future because one, who's going to take care of me when I get old?
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow's promised no one, but I'm scared of losing both of my parents.
Uh-huh.
The way the corporate world or just the economy of the world anyway is you never know when they're going to be out here, if you're going to be out here 51, 52, 53 years old looking for a job.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, to some extent, I kind of am, so to speak, and maybe subconsciously, it's like as far as what I'm doing with the charity, it's like, okay, God, I'm doing your work, so that means you're gonna, that means I'm sowing good seeds, so you're gonna take care of me when I get old. It doesn't always work that way, and maybe that's just subconsciously, maybe that's kind of my thinking, or not to say that's my motivating factor in doing this. I kind of just fell into this with the charity, but yeah, in many ways, in some ways, I am, I do, fear the future, or where I'm going to be, say, 10 years from now, 15, 20 years. It's. I guess a lot of us sometimes we fear the unknown, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, if you look back, do you remember as a child thinking about what your life would be when you were grown up? I mean, you not necessarily when you were around 50, but do you ever like think back and say, boy, life was not like what I thought it was going to be?
Yeah, and I'm not one to. I wasn't one. Maybe that's detriment. But I'm not one to really plan, so to speak. It wasn't like I said, okay, well, I'm gonna do this by age 27, and then I'm gonna do this by age 30. For me, I didn't really. I mean, I thought I was gonna be a big time author / publisher.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of my 3 books, the first and the third made money, and then I just decided I just didn't want to do it. Well, then too, of course, the industry changed, so everything is digital now. But I'm all over the place here. Yeah, I can kind of look and see that in certain areas I didn't plan. I didn't plan to still be in New York.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did you have a dream of moving to, say, Colorado or something?
I in my even during my hangout years, my 20s, I kind of had aspirations of moving back south, and I say back south. That's where I went to school. Um, I don't have those aspirations now, so to speak. But that was kind of the plan. Because even then, it was still the wife, the house, the 2.5 kids, the American dream, so to speak. But I didn't want that necessarily in New York.
Yeah.
So you try not to live in the past because that can get kind of dangerous, so to speak. And I guess it really serves no purpose. Sometimes I even think, okay, what would my life have been like if had I stayed in St. John's instead of switching schools after fifth grade? I'm sorry, after fourth grade. Yeah, so that's.
Well, let me just end on a more philosophic note because you said you don't have kids and I don't have kids, and yet because of my art and whatnot, I always and even doing these interviews with people, I'm always thinking about communication. Art is communication. How people in the future will be represented, and I think talking with you know people of this age that aren't famous, aren't movie stars, aren't sports stars, aren't rich celebrities. That's why I'm doing these interviews, starting with you. I that people have an idea that say in 50 or 100 years or something, or even much farther down the line, could look at this and say, "Boy, that guy is not that different than me." Even if that person watching this video on whatever replaces the internet is maybe on some space station around Jupiter or around another star. Do you ever think into the future? Now you don't have any progeny that you can think, well, my kind, my family name is going to go on, at least not from your loins. But do you ever like think of the future and people traveling space? Because when we were kids, remember just before we started school, man had just landed on the moon. There was the space station throughout our years in St. John. So it seemed obvious that by 40 years from now, we'd have moon stations and space stations and something on Mars, and yet we're still not there. Do you ever still look ahead, beyond yourself and this life?
Yeah, just the advancement of technology, so to speak. You're in Texas, I'm in New York, and we're actually seeing each other, for the first time since 1975.
Yeah.
And I just know that there's somebody or some bodies out there who just has that open-minded way of thinking as to what can happen, what can happen next, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't have that type of vision, but I know that there are people who do say, okay, where do we go from here? And I guess it's just, limitless as far as where the future can go to. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's just limitless. I'm not crazy. It just takes the human element out of it, so to speak.
Yeah.
Testing instead of picking up the phone. Reading a book on a little gadget as opposed to going to the bookstore, skimming a book, getting in line, plucking down your money, and walking out with an actual, hardcover book. I mean, it bothered me that when the brick and mortar stores are going out, a thing of yesteryear. Some areas you just kind of wish that technology would not touch, so to speak.
Well, let me ask you, if you could speak to someone some point in the future and just talk about what life was like in the late 20th and early 21st century, your life that you've known it, would there be any things that you'd want them to know of that, it could be the way that the waves behind the Staten Island ferry when you rode it looked, or the way that a sunset over. What are those things that you cherish the most in your life?
Uh, well, for me, one is just maybe I'm not really answering your question, but one, just the youthful innocence that we had as kids, so to speak, or at least that I had. Like I said, when I came to St. John's, at no point did I feel I was really out of place by being the only black kid in class, or one of two later on. Um, uh, and just in certain areas where people can come together. I mean, when disco became the big rage, everybody liked disco. It was a type of music that blacks, whites, Hispanics, everybody loved, so to speak. And I guess just of course, we're seeing now different races coming together, protesting the election. For what it's worth. So, I mean, I guess that's it. I mean, part of me just wants to hang on to a certain youthful innocence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And just how things, evolve and get so much. I mean, you look at baseball players from the 1970s and look at now who were considered big then, and look at the size of these guys now.
Yeah.
Things just evolve, and some good, some bad. I don't know. That's kind of hard to say as far as what somebody would want to remember. I mean, I never thought a black man would become president of the United States.
Yeah.
When Obama first ran against Hillary, I thought she was going to mop the floor with him.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, you and I, as 51 years old, we've lived through that. We've lived through 9/11.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can say we've lived through Trump. I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to? Who knows what that's going to be like? Yay or nay. So yeah, I mean that's we've lived through seeing a president get impeached, Nixon. I mean, it's just
well,
we know what it's like pre-internet. Pre-cell phone.
Well, let me just end up by saying I want to thank you for doing this interview, and hopefully it'll be the first of many. One of the things that I sometimes look when I look on Facebook or other stuff, when I Google names of people I've known, people I've worked with, gone to school with, women I've dated, this kind of thing, and I see sometimes how their lives haven't worked out, or they things that happened to them from their youth have sort of screwed up their lives, or they've allowed it to screw up their lives. And I just wanted to say that I know hopefully sometime before both of us kick off from this third rock, that we can meet in person again, either me getting back to New York or you coming to Texas. But
that's on my bucket list.
Yeah, but I know that I always, of all the kids from St. John's, and it's odd that, I think I mentioned to you once when we talked that wherever I work, for example, and I've done many jobs, I forget how many places I've worked for, I've done mostly blue collar stuff. It's odd that black people always seem to gravitate toward me. And I think it's because I treat everyone basically the same, in that if they're decent people, if they're open people, whereas I think a lot of white people don't. And yet I always felt closer to you, even as a child, even putting aside a racial difference, which anyone watching this 100, 200 years will probably think like, boy, they were really, I mean, you might be, what, 2 or 3 shades darker than me. That people would even talk about that. But in this day and age that we grew up in, that was unfortunately a thing that was stood out. And but I always felt closer to you than any other of the kids that we went to school with together. Not that there was, I guess, some girls that I thought were cute, but I don't know. I always felt a special kind of bond, and maybe it's because we were outsiders for different reasons.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's appropriate that you're the person that's going to kick off this series. So I just in closing, do you have any final thing that you'd just want to say for anyone in the future?
Uh, well, I'm honored to have done this, much less have been the first one. Uh, even before prior, 9 or 10 years prior to Facebook, I'm thankful that you got back in touch with me.
Yeah.
And personally, I mean, you slash St. John's will always be in my heart, particularly fourth grade. I remember again, and that's not to get too deep into this. Once I switched school, it was kind of like a loss of innocence, so to speak. And I know, like around Christmas time, I kind of just go back to my final Christmas of St. John's, which was '74.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I had this conversation with my mother. This was in 2004. So that was 30 years ago since I saw my last Christmas in St. John's. And I said, no matter what I do that day, what was going on, I said, I gotta call Dan Christmas Day. And I think I called about 11 o'clock New York time. I said, well, it's kind of late. I said, oh, no, wait a minute, you're an hour or so behind me. And I called. You were kind of surprised that, oh, hey, how you doing? Like, I'm surprised to hear from you on Christmas Day. But it was like I had to connect with that, that Christmas season of '74, that last period of innocence for me as a student at St. John's. So
That's weird. I don't remember that, but
we didn't talk long. But yeah, we didn't talk long. It was like
yeah.
I just had to, this was pre-enter.
Yeah.
You were my only lane to St. John's.
Uh-huh.
I gotta, so it was, like there's a bond there that exists, even though from, we lost contact from '75 till I guess 2000, 25 years. So
Yeah.
until really, you found me. So hey, I'm thankful to be able to do this. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I think it's great what you're doing with this and just in general. I mean, I don't write that much anymore, but sometimes when I see your post about how you knocked off X amount of words in such a short period of time, that inspires me. You can knock off a book over the course of a week and a couple of weeks, and that it inspires me. So, hey, the world needs people like you doing this.
All right. Well, let's end it at there. And thanks again, Marc, for being my first subject.
Well, thank you.
Take care.
All right, you do the same.